It was a chilly, overcast morning when Marcus first noticed something was wrong. It had started with subtle things, small, barely noticeable occurrences that anyone else would dismiss. But to Marcus, they were harbingers of something darker. He had always been in tune with his surroundings, hyper-aware of the energy around him. Lately, his once peaceful home felt different, like a shadow had settled over it, looming and thick with malice. Marcus had lived in the old stone house on the outskirts of town for as long as he could remember. It was his family home, passed down from generation to generation. The house, though isolated, had always felt like a sanctuary to him, a place where the world's chaos couldn't touch him. But now, the once comforting creaks of the floorboards at night felt ominous, like footsteps following him in the dark. The temperature in the house would drop suddenly, leaving him shivering even in the middle of summer. There was an odd smell too, faint but unmistakable, decayed at first. Marcus tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises, and perhaps he needed to check the heating system. He even laughed it off with his friends at the bar, chalking it up to the house being quirky, but deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Waiting, his dog, Buster, had become increasingly uneasy, growling at corners of the house where there was nothing to see. One night, after a particularly exhausting day at work, Marcus collapsed onto his couch, hoping to find some reprieve in the pages of a novel. But the house had other plans. As he lay there, staring at the ceiling, he felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over him, heavy like a thick blanket suffocating his every breath. He closed his eyes, willing it to go away, but then he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft it could have been mistaken for the wind. But it wasn't. It was a voice, calling his name. His heart pounded in his chest as he sat up, scanning the room for the source. The house was silent again, as if nothing had happened. But Marcus knew better. From that night on, the whispers became more frequent. They came from the walls, from the dark corners, always soft, always just out of reach, but unmistakable. They called his name, over and over, sometimes with a hint of malice, sometimes almost pleading. Sleep became elusive. Every time he closed his eyes, he would wake up in a cold sweat, feeling the oppressive presence growing stronger. He tried to tell himself it was all in his head, a figment of his imagination brought on by stress and exhaustion, but the signs were becoming impossible to ignore. The shadows in the house moved in ways that defied logic. The mirrors would catch glimpses of things that weren't there when he turned around. He could feel something brushing against him in the darkness, though nothing was visible. One evening, after days of restless sleep, Marcus stood in front of the bathroom mirror, washing his face, hoping the cold water would shock him out of the fog that had settled over his mind. As he raised his head to meet his reflection, his heart nearly stopped. There, in the mirror, was his face, but it wasn't him. His eyes were wrong, darker, sunken, with a shadow lurking just beneath the surface. Someone else staring back at him. Panicked, he backed away, knocking over the soap dish. His reflection, now normal again, seemed to mock him. Was he losing his mind? Was the isolation getting to him? Or was there something more sinister at play? Marcus needed answers. He turned to the only place that might offer some explanation: his family's history. The house had been in the family for generations, and though he had never paid much attention to the stories passed down through the years, he recalled hearing whispers about a dark past. There had been deaths, unexplained accidents, and disappearances tied to the house, but no one ever talked about it directly. It was as if the family had made a collective decision to bury the past. Determined, Marcus spent the next few days rummaging through old family records and documents in the attic. That's when he found it, an old journal, its pages yellowed with age, belonging to his great-great-grandfather. As he flipped through the pages, his blood ran cold. The entries detailed strange occurrences, much like the ones Marcus was experiencing: whispers, shadows, and an ever-present sense of dread. But there was more. The journal spoke of a spirit, a malevolent entity that had attached itself to the family generations ago. The spirit, a vengeful soul, had been bound to the house through a curse placed by an old enemy of the family. Over the years, it had claimed the lives of several family members, feeding off their fear, slowly, driving them mad before consuming them entirely. The only way to break the curse was through an ancient ritual, one that required confronting the spirit directly. One evening, as Marcus sat by his computer, searching for any mention of the curse online, a notification popped up. Someone had responded to a thread he posted on a paranormal forum about the strange occurrences in his home. The username was Cryptic Lost Souls, and the message simply read, "I know what's happening to you. I can help you, Marcus hesitated, staring at the screen. He was desperate for answers, but something about the message made him uneasy. Still, with nothing to lose, he responded, "What do you know?" A few moments later, a new message appeared. "Meet me tomorrow. Midnight. The cemetery behind the old church. You're not safe alone." Marcus's skin prickled. The cemetery? At midnight? He was unsure what to think. His gut told him this could be dangerous. But another part of him, the part that had been suffering in silence for weeks, urged him to go. The next night, Marcus drove to the old cemetery as instructed. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the gravestones. The wind howled through the trees, making the place feel alive in its own way. Marcus parked his car at the edge of the church grounds and stepped out, his heart racing. He had never been to this cemetery before, but it felt oddly familiar. He walked between the rows of gravestones, his footsteps crunching on the gravel path. His breath came in shallow gasps, his nerves on edge. Then he saw her. Standing by an ancient, weathered tombstone was a woman. She was tall, dressed in dark clothing, with long black hair that flowed in the wind. Her face was obscured by the shadows, but Marcus could feel her eyes on him. "You came," she said, her voice low and cold. "Good." Marcus swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "Who are you?" "My name is Selene," she replied, stepping forward into the moonlight. Her face was pale, almost ethereal, and her eyes held a depth that made Marcus feel as though she had seen things far beyond what he could comprehend. "I've been watching your family for a long time. You're in grave danger, Marcus." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" Selene's expression darkened. "The spirit in your home, it's not just any spirit. It's an ancient one, bound to your family through blood. It feeds on fear, on your suffering. And if you don't stop it soon, it will consume you." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He had known something was wrong, but hearing it spoken aloud by a stranger made it feel more real, more terrifying. "How do you know all of this?" Selene hesitated for a moment before answering. "Because I've encountered this spirit before. I've spent years studying it, tracking it. I know how to stop it, but it won't be easy." Marcus didn't fully trust Selene, but he didn't have many options. He agreed to let her help him, and together, they devised a plan to confront the spirit head-on. According to Selene, they would need to perform a ritual, a more advanced version of the one his great-great-grandfather had attempted. This ritual would require both of them to act as conduits, drawing the spirit out of the house and into the physical realm where it could be banished once and for all. For the next week, Selene stayed with Marcus, helping him prepare for the ritual. During that time, the activity in the house grew worse. The whispers became louder, more aggressive, and the shadows moved with a malevolent purpose. Marcus could feel the spirit growing stronger, feeding off his fear and Selene's presence. One night, as they sat in the living room discussing the final steps of the ritual, the temperature in the house dropped suddenly. The lights flickered, and a cold wind swept through the room, despite the windows being closed. "It's here," Selene whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "It knows what we are planning." The night of the ritual arrived. Marcus and Selene gathered in the basement, the place where the spirit's power was strongest. They had drawn a large circle of salt on the floor, surrounded by candles. In the center of the circle, Marcus placed a silver dagger, an artifact that Selene had brought with her, said to have been blessed by a powerful shaman centuries ago. Marcus could barely breathe. The air was so thick with tension. The whispers had grown louder, filling his mind with thoughts of despair and dread. Selene began the incantation, her voice steady despite the fear that Marcus knew she must have felt as the ritual progressed. The spirit manifested. It was no longer a shadow lurking in the corners. It was there, in the basement with them, a swirling mass of darkness and rage. Its form shifted and twisted, and Marcus could see the faces of his ancestors within it, his great-great-grandfather, his great-uncle, even his father, who had died in the house years ago. "Marcus," the spirit hissed, its voice a chorus of agony and malice. "Join us." Marcus felt his resolve faltering. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating. But then he heard Selene's voice cutting through the darkness. "Stay strong, Marcus," she shouted, her eyes locked on the spirit. "You can't let it win." With a surge of determination, Marcus gripped the silver dagger and stepped forward. The spirit roared in fury, but Marcus didn't hesitate. He plunged the dagger into the ground at the center of the circle, releasing a burst of light that filled the room. The spirit let out a deafening scream, its form disintegrating into a cloud of smoke and shadow. The light grew brighter, consuming the darkness, until finally, the spirit was gone. The house was silent. Marcus and Selene stood in the aftermath, exhausted but alive. The spirit had been banished, and the curse that had plagued Marcus's family for generations was finally broken as they left the basement. Marcus turned to Selene. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude. Selene nodded, a small smile on her lips. "You were stronger than you realized, Marcus." Together, they walked out of the house, leaving the darkness behind. End. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and we'll see you again soon.